Hey kids, cook real food. Welcome to this latest edition of our Tuesday series. I'm very, very excited to introduce you to Dr. Kelly Brogan today. Dr. Brogan is an incredible expert in the field of mental health, particularly depression and women's health. And she's agreed to talk to us about how we can help our kids, how we can kind of help our kids build more resilient brains. Thanks for being here, Dr. Brogan.
Total pleasure.
Yeah, so audience, let me introduce you to her. She's pretty impressive. Dr. Brogan's actually a board certified psychiatrist, but also board certified as an integrative holistic medicine, which changes everything. She's an expert in a root cause resolution approach to mental health. So not always just what's going on in your head, but what's going on in your body that affects your mental health. She doesn't do drugs, meaning she doesn't prescribe drugs anymore, even though she could, and there are really good reasons for that. But most importantly, Dr. Brogan is a mom of two, and she's super passionate about showing people that their most vibrant health is possible if they can connect their mind and their body and really return to the person that they were born to be. Oh, she's also a New York Times bestselling author of A Mind of Your Own, and she published a children's book co-authored with her daughter Sophia that's called A Time for Rain. So she is perfect for this audience. And again, thank you, Dr. Brogan. I think we're going to jump right in here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now, I've been researching children's mental health and depression lately, and I've interviewed a lot of local counselors and teachers, and almost all of them, without hesitation, say that the biggest increase they're seeing in mental health issues in our kids is anxiety. It's like jaw-dropping to me. This is as young as kindergarten. What is going on with that? Why is there such an increase?
So any good answer is not a straightforward black or white answer, right? So there are two things going on. Yes, there is something very wrong with being a child in America today. They are sensing something very real. Krishnamurti said that it's no sign of health to be well adapted to a very sick society, right? So that one wouldn't feel anxiety walking the planet today would mean that you would have to be shut off from any sort of interaction or dialogue with your soul, right? So the way that we are raising children, I know you know this, I know your listeners know this, bathed in 5G networks, being microwaved by Wi-Fi in their school settings, having little to no time outside to play, in home environments that are, marked by the unconsciousness that we are handing down as parents, a total disconnection from our felt experience, from our emotional being, from our bodies, being fed, food products, food merchandise instead of actual food. And then, it gets to the sort of biological layers of where do things even go wrong earlier in their birth and their breastfeeding and their exposure to medications beginning from an early age. So it's like, Houston, we have a problem. We do. Things are very wrong, and that children are sentinels, right? We know this. We know that they feel perhaps often what we suppress an awareness of. So that is happening. However, the way that this is being captured, categorized, and defined by the medical system is really the problem. And when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, we didn't diagnose children. Children were not diagnosed. That was not occurring. There was no mental health, mental illness for that was applied to children. And ever since the DSM-3, which the DSM is the sort of Bible of psychiatry, it's a number of terms divined by a round table of largely pharmaceutically tied individuals. That is a descriptive approach to categorizing normalcy and abnormal behavior, right? So homosexuality was in this book up until not too long ago. And the DSM-3 in 1980 was the beginning of the medicalization of child mental health, right? So that's where ADHD came on board, and where up to not long after 13% of children were being labeled with ADHD. And so what comes with ADHD in a good percentage of those cases is stimulant prescription, right? And so instead of asking, is there something contextual? Is there an environment that could be optimized? Are these children, are 13% of children really sick? or is something wrong with the context we are putting them in, right? And instead of doing that, the biological approach that they were captured in really was also a reflection, as Robert Whitaker, who's an investigative journalist who's really opened my eyes over the past decade to a lot of the ills of psychiatry, would say. He calls it the guild of psychiatry, and the interests of that guild are in being seen as a legitimate medical profession apart from psychologists, right? So what happens in this perfect storm is that parents begin to hear that their children have a brain disorder, right? It's a brain malfunction, so to speak. It's not behavioral, right? That's the realm of the psychologist. And so the medications that they are then treated with themselves induce states of anxiety, psychosis, mania. So then we have children who are being prescribed other kinds of medications. And now we have a situation, where we have children being diagnosed with bipolar disorder as young as 2 years old. And if we don't connect the dots, right, if we don't say, hold on a minute, and you're like, what is actually happening here? And is there an Occam's razor? Is there a simpler solution that would better resonate with our shared and collective understanding of what raising healthy children looks like, right? Because none of us actually believe that raising healthy children should require drugs, right? That's right. Intuitive, right? So how do we get off course, and how can we sort of come back online?
Sure. So part of the problem is an initial maybe overdiagnoses in the interest of the pharmaceutical field or the interest of big medicine. And then all of that buildup. There's never a simple answer, right? But this toxic buildup. Why do you think, like, as far as root cause for depression and anxiety, I've noticed there's no Anxiety Awareness Month, but it's Depression Awareness Month. So I want to like drag anxiety into this because there is no month for it, and it's this huge problem. 1/3 of teenagers are having episodes of anxiety, maybe not diagnosed, but they're self-reporting at the very least. And again, these counselors are saying that they're seeing, they're not diagnosing, because these are just school counselors. They can literally see and feel the anxiety in the classroom interfering with children's ability to learn and socialize. It's pretty intense. So these root causes, like, how are anxiety and depression linked as far as how they're manifesting themselves in reality?
I think anxiety is a term. In my practice, one of my sort of ground rules, I have many, is that we don't use the word anxiety, we use the word depression, because these have become terms for, really very like myriad experiences that can come under the fold of either term, right? But generally, when we talk about anxiety, what we're talking about is a state of hyperarousal, right? So where sometimes it can be as bad as you feel like your spinal cord is like plugged into a electrical socket, right? Whereas depression is often a state of underarousal or hypoarousal, or disconnection is normally the term I like to use. So when we talk about people who respond a certain way to mismatch with their environment, that's how we'll summarize, my first answer, right? So if they respond a certain way through hyperarousal, then it's going to be called anxiety. And, people sort of break down with different adaptive methodologies. Like, I myself have never really experienced a day of depression in my life, but you better believe I've experienced many, 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 many days of anxiety. And it's a constant sort of balancing act for me to know how to work with that. Also because I was never taught how to work with feelings of discomfort, discord, because we are enculturated to the belief that discomfort is a problem, right? Which is why we have over-the-counter pain relievers, including Tylenol, one of the most toxic medications on the market is you can buy at CVS, right? So we're living and marinating in a consciousness that says, anytime you feel not okay, that's a problem, and you're not perceiving something real, so we need to just make you feel okay, right? So we need to manage that symptom rather than developing a deeper understanding of it. So I would argue that, these days, even with the nature of what's happening in terms of EMFs, that nervous systems, the sympathetic, the fight or flight nervous systems are on fire, right? So that is going to be far more prevalent a problem, even if we take the psychospiritual elements out of it, what kids are sensing, how they're feeling unsafe. They're feeling unsafe in their home environments, they're feeling unsafe in their bodies, and then they're feeling unsafe at school. So, my bias is because I've thrown a lot of root causes at you so far, right? Like so many different things that could be contributing. And then you sort of throw up your hands and you're like, well, obviously so much is wrong. Where do we begin? But my bias is to address the low hanging fruit first, right? So there are a lot of physical imbalances that are so readily reversible in weeks sometimes that can masquerade as psychiatric imbalances. I like to call them the psychiatric pretenders. And one that is highly significant to this population, but probably no more so than the adult population, is sugar, right? So I don't need to tell you that. But you and others may not even fully appreciate just how serious a manifestation this can be, right? Like it's not always limited to kids bouncing off the walls after they have some ice cream. That this literally can be a driver of what becomes lifelong psychiatric prescription treatment, right? So this is one of the reversible root causes of behavioral disturbance and this sort of nervous system on fire phenomenon that can be classified as an anxiety disorder. I mean, I had a patient who was having 6, according to her, panic attacks a day on multiple medications. She was heading for electroconvulsive therapy in New York. We still do that. And literally in the space of a month, her symptoms totally reversed. She had the first month of her adult life without a single panic attack. And all that we did was change her diet. I mean, that was literally it. So it really dispossesses us of this idea that we can hold on to the chemical imbalance theory, right? Like it's something wrong up here if we can reverse it that easily through food.
Absolutely. Thank you, by the way, for not kicking me out for breaking your rules. I'm sorry, I used the wrong terms.
They're not wrong. They're just so non-specific,
Sure. No, I really appreciate hearing you talk about what they're basically the reverse of the same function of our sympathetic nervous system. And it's so inspiring to hear a story of an adult who can reverse such massive pain in her life in a month. Usually children are able to change things even faster just because their bodies are growing faster and they're more neuroplastic. So that's hope that gives parents. So if a parent has a child who seems to be over or under reacting to their society or their environment or their emotions, cutting sugar would be the first step. Are there any other really just practical you can do it now steps that people should be trying?
Yes. There are, in terms of these very reversible imbalances, the ones that are most evidence-based, I would say, and not necessarily in the pediatric population, but nonetheless in the human population. Another low-hanging fruit is processed gluten and dairy. So, obviously many of us have a growing awareness. I mean, when I first went gluten-free 10 years ago, there was like one bag of gluten-free pretzels at the health food store. And now it's like, I can go to any restaurant pretty much in the world and have a good shot at feeling uncontaminated by the end of the meal. So that is a totally low hanging fruit. And when you eliminate processed gluten and dairy, you're not eliminating any actual foods that children need, right? The challenge is, again, as I don't need to tell you, is that children have been adapted to, the hits of processed food. So most kids only eat, mac and cheese. I mean, if you look at a kid's menu, it's like hilarious every time I look, chicken nuggets, cheeseburger and mac and cheese. So obviously we have allowed them to become addicted, and the metabolites of these foods have a direct impact on our reward system, on our opiate system. However, for the most part, you can make swaps that your kids won't even notice. So in my adult population, we go a little bit more hardcore and take out, even the swaps for at least a month. But in this population, it's like a total no-brainer to give your child a month without dairy or gluten or processed sugar. And when I say processed sugar, for me, I don't include things like honey or maple syrup or molasses. I mean actual, processed sugar. And in this case, that would include things like cane sugar. So some people, look for the word sugar, or for any processed food, you're looking for the ways that it's snuck in, like dextrose, etc.
Right. High fructose corn syrup, obviously a big one, because you're saying all these things are inflaming our system. The gluten, the dairy, the sugar, they're causing this inflammatory reaction, which is having a cascading effect on the way we think.
Yes. Exactly. And a lot of that is because of, I'll throw in just a last sort of top tier category, which is go organic for a month, right? So it doesn't have to be for the rest of your life. Don't think about that. You're establishing the conditions for an experiment so that you can learn what your child's baseline is. And without that data, you're going to be swimming around seeing this specialist, this healer, that acupuncture. Just get the basics under your belt. And most of the time I find, because I work with adult women in my practice, and I find that once they go through this process, of course they want to apply it to their children, but they project a lot of their own resistance onto their children. Oh, they won't eat anything, or they're not going to cooperate, it's too hard, whatever. Actually, they want to feel well. So as they feel well, within often like 10 days of this kind of change, the resistance falls away. And my children have been eating this way forever, and they could care less, but when I first would take them to birthday parties and all this suburban nonsense, I would feel like, oh my God, they can't eat the pizza or the cake. They're gonna have to be in therapy for the rest of their lives. They're gonna hate me. They don't care. They literally don't care. That's not what they're there for. And I was projecting all of that, all of my childhood food addictions onto them. So if you can get the month under your belt, with the inclusion of organic, because a lot of the biological issues that we're learning around GMOs and associated herbicides, pesticides, glyphosate-containing chemicals are not only directly impacting the gut ecology, but also the capacity of the liver to do its job. So now we understand, unlike when I was even in medical school, it's not like, oh, here's psychiatry up here, here's gastroenterology down here, Now we understand, because of burgeoning fields like psychoneuroimmunology, that all of these things are connected in this very complex web, and that the gut and the brain have bidirectional rapport, right? So like we sort of get that we can impact the gut through our thinking, right? Because if we've fallen in love and we lose our appetite, or you have to give a toast at a wedding and like you have diarrhea beforehand or whatever, we sort of get that can happen that way. But this other direction is what science is very elegantly demonstrating, which is that when we impact our gut ecology, which we do most profoundly through nutrition, we actually have an impact on the immune-based signaling that's happening in the brain. And that has the most direct impact on mood, cognition, and behavior, that we can leverage.
That is so, it's all fascinating. And that term you threw out, I gotta break that down for people because it came out quickly. Psychoneuroimmunology. So that's the connections between the brain and the neurological system, the way we think, the actual physical neurological system, so nerves and all that stuff, right? And then immunology would be like literally your immune system. And is the gut in that too?
It's literally your immune system. Our gut, as far as recent estimates sort of capture, is responsible for 70 to 80% of our immune activity. Sometimes that term is psychoneuroendocrinology. Sometimes all four of them are put together. And what's interesting is the psycho part is a reference to actually our thoughts and beliefs, right? So we want to be very reductionist and think, that the mind, it's a Cartesian, like a Descartes sort of like wake effect, which is that, there's the mind and then there's the body, and they sort of do their own thing. And, some of the most beautiful research that I report on is around how belief and what's called expectancy is perhaps one of the most important determinants of medical outcomes. And this spans all medical specialties. Psychiatry is very relevant, but even in surgery and pain, pain management trials, that what you are thinking and believing literally impacts your neuroinflammatory system, your hormonal system. It's our power seat is to influence our mindset around this.
That's amazing. So is there something to be said for positive talk coming from parents to kids about their school performance, about their social life, about the way they feel? Like, is there a really practical application to that?
So I think that we as parents, I want to say something first, because I have two daughters. This is a very relevant topic to my life. I spend a lot of my time considering how I can deliver what I've learned, to them and change the way that they are being raised on a very sick planet, right? So I want to say to parents one thing. which is that before we get to what you can do as a parent for your kids, the most important thing you can do as a parent, in my opinion, is to take care of yourself. Literally, is to prioritize your self-care in a way that's probably uncomfortable. Because the ways that many of us were raised, psychiatry calls them narcissistic extensions, right? So we were raised as these sort of surrogate egos for our parents. Many of us, maybe you weren't, but many of us were raised so that our performance in life was so vital to our parents' sense of self that we became this vessel, this like really intense incubator for their unexamined stuff, right? And we had to perform so that they could feel good about themselves, right? We don't want to hand that down. Like the way to cut this cycle is to prioritize self-care as an act of self-love, even if you don't feel access, to loving yourself. That's a tall order. That's a later stage spiritual, expression. To prioritize your self-care. And what I mean by that is your diet, your exercise, your sleep, your meditative practice, your detox. To prioritize that in a way that your kids are going to notice, right? So my kids know that if I'm, sitting cross-legged with my eyes closed on the floor, do not bother mama. They get that. And I feel it's not like, oh, I'm taking all this time. They now have a model for what it looks like to regulate oneself. And this, I think, is walking the walk, so to speak, is the most important thing we can do for our kids. However, there are other ways that we can send them signals of safety. This is how we turn off that fight or flight. We create a sense of their being seen, supported, accepted. And, that's why we wrote that book, because it's the ethos of our household that, like, you're upset, you cry. You're mad, you yell, that there are feelings that are uncomfortable for people and no one wants to deal with them. And yet they have reign in this household. They have room. And so a big part, the greatest antidote, I think, for parents in terms of preparing your child to resist the onslaught of pharmaceutical products that are going to be coming their way is to have them understand that their feeling states are real, that their feeling states matter, and that there's a message in there. So you're feeling angry. I wonder what that's about. Like, connecting dots, curiosity, beginning to make room without leaping for the fix.
Wow. Okay. So feelings count, feelings matter. Your kids aren't your trophies.
Yes.
That's really important. Separate them from yourself. Is it still okay to tell your kids, like, I'm really proud of you for doing that? That's acknowledging their success, right? I hope.
Yeah. I think just to sort of like reflect to them, to witness them, right? Because once there's a valuation, then they experience that. And I'm not a child psychology expert by any means, but I've noticed that they experience that as love. And we want to give them an experience where they feel love, not only when they're doing cool, good, interesting stuff, but also when they're acting like total pains in the ass, right? So that is an adult who can hold both the good and the bad in the same vibration without having to have it split, right? Where they're all good or all bad. And a lot of us get arrested in that psychology, where it's either all good or it's all bad, and there's no ability to hold the two. That's a state of psychological development that many of us don't actually reach.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we know that emotions are complex and there's a lot of gray, but we just need to acknowledge and accept that. That's great. I do often tell my kids if they're throwing a big fit, I say, I love you a lot.
Exactly.
I don't like what you're doing, but I still love you. So I'm glad that I'm on point there.
Exactly.
Let's end with, it has to be addressed. You've mentioned our toxic environment and you called it a sick world that we're living in. And we know that we have like this toxic load. Everything that's going in our body is kind of adding up and filling this bucket of toxicity. And when it spills over, different people have different sizes, we get sick and we see it from the outside. But everywhere I go, and parents complain to me about this in my audience all the time, we hear, oh, a little candy is okay. Everything in moderation. Oh, we can't worry about every plastic container, everything in moderation. Or oh, this medicine is rated safe for kids. It's okay. Ooh, any response to that, Dr. Brogan?
Yeah. Well, it's called, even in the medical literature, biochemical individuality, which is a reference to the fact that no longer do we actually have a good means of assessing safety. We're in a very unusual time where basically we've created this mess and we don't even know how to assess the magnitude of it, because the way that we looked at toxicity previously was the dose makes the poison, right? And now research is coming out that actually says, well, what your immune and endocrine system is doing at the moment of exposure and the synergistic effects of multiple different exposures, even at low dose, well, that actually makes the poison. And so how do we study that at scale? We can't. So that's why, I like to take it a bit philosophical and reference a book called The Continuum Concept by Jane Liedloff, which is from the 70s, but it impacted me deeply because it speaks to how we are wired for a certain set of exposures from birth, right? We're wired for a certain kind of birth experience, for skin to skin contact right after birth, for in arms holding for the first 6 months. Of course, we aren't wired for the many myriad exposures, as you said, which are filling our bucket up. So how do we get back to that continuum? It's calling us, right? So that's what symptoms are. You're being called back to that continuum. And so in the end, as much as I love science and find that there's so much beautiful research supporting this, vitalistic perspective that we have this capacity to heal and right ourselves when in harmony and alignment with the natural world, I love that. But in the end, you're not going to wait for the studies to validate what you probably know deep down your child needs. And the reason that we make excuses is because we feel that we don't have power to change our immediate environment. We as adults feel disempowered. It's just not the case. If we have power over anything, it's over our household, right? So we should be the queens of that domain, right? And kings of that domain, if nothing else. And does that mean being neurotic and constantly in a fear state? No. If you're going to take this information and you're going to apply it to a template where the entire world and every, Evian bottle that you come into contact with is a vector of fear, you've mishandled the message, right? Because there is a happy medium where you hold this sense of empowerment through information, which is obviously what you're here for, right? You hold this sense of empowerment through information, and then you don't allow that to become yet another mechanism of, applying the programs of control and dominance and fixing it and, neurotically securing every little detail. Because then you're still in fight or flight. You might as well not bother. You might as well not bother with any of it, truly. So how can we create a feeling of okayness, a feeling of being in control, a feeling of, sort of doing the best we can with the information that we have without letting that spill over into hypervigilance? However, the caveat being that when it comes to pharmaceuticals, I apply a very different lens. So while my children, don't eat gluten, dairy, or sugar, and that's pretty much 100% rule for me for no good reason other than that, I can't in good faith, allow them to. To me, it's like would I feed them like a tincture of, I don't know what, arsenic every morning? Like I wouldn't do it. To me, they're equivalent. Just it's my bias, right? This is not true for everyone, but it happens to be my bias. So you have to understand what you believe to be health food so that you can apply that, to your child and your household. At the same time, for me, the pharmaceutical lens is viewed a bit differently because there's unlikely to be one food exposure, one plastic bottle exposure, one pesticide exposure that literally changes your life forever. And when we're talking about pharmaceuticals and the undisclosed risks, including, pharmaceuticals like antibiotics and vaccines, one exposure can literally change the course of your child's life. So if you're not being informed properly by your treating physician, which is these days nearly impossible, that would be the case, then it's upon you to inform yourself. So sort of placing our concerns in the right place with the right hierarchy probably, again, is another example of how we can create nuance. We're being black and white and saying, oh, well, moderation always worked for everyone. No, it actually didn't. You know? So what is your hierarchy of attention? And, again, for me, it's, pharmaceuticals and food, and then maybe EMF related stuff, so you can have your own hierarchy of things that are really going to garner your serious attention without neuroses. And then the rest allows you to sort of like feel some degree of fluidity and flexibility.
Sounds like a great prescription. Step 1, don't freak out. Step 2, clean up what you can with the knowledge you have, starting with pharmaceuticals. And step 3, don't freak out some more. Right?
It just never serves, right? It never serves to freak out.
Right. So keeping the stress levels even.
Yeah.
Oh, Dr. Kelly Brogan, thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom with our community. It's been lovely and informative. And just, I feel like sometimes I feel stressed at the end of an interview. I just kind of feel washed over with peace. Like, don't freak out. That's the final message. So again, we will share links to where you can find Dr. Brogan online and her books and her amazing programs. Again, mostly for women, but if we are taking care of our kids well, moms, we do need to set that example and take good care of ourselves, because no matter what we say to them, they will emulate what we do. So thank you again for being here, Dr. Brogan. And listeners, come back next week for more ways to be the best parent you can be with all the knowledge that you have. Thank you.